Welcome back to the Dream World podcast. I have so many cool updates for everybody. Lots of awesome, dreamy events coming up this spring. First one coming up, as you've heard me talk about before, is the IASD conference. This year it is 100% online, so there is no travel necessary. You don't have to worry about lodging. You can literally join from the comfort of your own home, which is great. It means lower conference fees and more accessible. So please join. There's going to be so many amazing presentations. If you've seen my videos of me traveling around the world to check out these conferences, this is your opportunity to really experience it for yourself in the comfort of your own home. Definitely check that out. Today we're going to be talking to one of the presenters about his presentation. But really quick, there's a couple more events that I want to share with you guys. These are more local in-person events. If you are in Atlanta, Georgia, every month I do a free dream sharing circle where we get together and share dreams with each other, do different analysis techniques. Sometimes we make art, and it's really a fun, intimate, small group where we just share dreams and our love for dream work. But if you are not local to Georgia, no worries. Check out my website. I have a lot of free resources on there and a lot of things that you can, access from the comfort of your own home. So let's get to it. Welcome my guest today, Jesse Lyon. All right, I'm here with Jesse from Lyon Mental Health. Thanks for joining me today. We're going to talk about the IASD online conference this year, which is in June.
Thanks, Amina. Thanks so much for the introduction. The presentation is going to be about the way that I've started to utilize dreams inside of mental health counseling to help people overcome trauma. So my background is I own Lyon Counseling. We've got 4 locations in Central Florida, all across Central Florida. We actually recently won Best Practice in Central Florida. And so I'm really proud of the work that we've done. But I, in particular, and many of the members of my team, we specialize in complex trauma, which is kind of an emerging field and something that we're learning a lot more about. It's very different, and the treatment is very different from PTSD. There's a lot of different modalities that treat PTSD. I think one of the most common that you hear about is EMDR. But EMDR and some of those others like ART can really struggle to address complex trauma. And complex trauma, for those who maybe aren't familiar, are situations where somebody has a traumatic experience, maybe when they're little. They've got a really terrible childhood experience. We call those ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And then they go on to high school and they're bullied. And then they go on to college and they have some kind of assault. And then they go on and they have a car accident. So there's this series of events that start to create a story that a person believes about themselves. And the way that you have to treat those is very different than just, I had one bad car accident and I need EMDR to help me through. And that's why many of the members of my team, and I, especially myself, utilize hypnotherapy to help people overcome their trauma. And so for me, hypnotherapy really was the start of my work into the dream space. When somebody's in that altered state of consciousness, it's very similar to the altered state of consciousness everyone experiences while they sleep, particularly the part where you're falling asleep. And that's the part where you'll really have some spontaneous images and thoughts come into your mind. And so in this presentation, what I'll be doing is sharing over the 10 years of work, more than 10 years of work that I've done helping people overcome trauma. I've started to identify a pattern. And I'm very excited about dreams and the interpretation of dreams for mental health counseling because the number one predictor of traumatic response, PTSD, are the post-traumatic nightmares that they start to experience. And so if you can identify the patterns of post-traumatic nightmares that begin to develop in an individual who's experienced trauma, you can intervene much earlier than when you wait for them to develop the full symptomology they might experience later on. And so it's like an early intervention system. And so what I'm going to present about is the way that there's a very predictable pattern that the brain goes through as it heals from trauma and the specific signs and symbols that you want to look for in their dreams to tell exactly where they are in that recovery journey and then intervene effectively with tools that are going to meet them exactly where they're at in that recovery journey. And so for me, the motivation for this is very much a call to ask people. It's like, I've done like almost qualitative research, right? Like this has just been my personal experience, my personal practice, watching this pattern unfold over and over. But I think it lends itself enough that there's enough evidence to say we should probably do some greater research. And so I'm very excited to present to the International Association on the Study of Dreams, to network with other professionals, other universities, other researchers, to maybe start to add an even more diverse set of data to these experiences so we can see, wow, this is a way that we can start to treat trauma much more effectively than the current modalities that are out there.
What are the different stages? And maybe give some like examples of like what that looks like in a dream.
Yeah, absolutely. So if anyone's familiar with like a bell curve, right? Like I think the one that's most common is like when you look at IQs, they follow a very predictable bell curve, right? So it starts down here, it goes up, and you got most people right here in the middle, and then it kind of goes back down. Dreams follow that same sort of bell curve pattern. If you've got on one side, you've got their recovery journey, right? You've got unhealthy on this side, all the way to healthy on this side. And then you have on sort of the y axis, you've got literal to metaphorical. People follow a journey of 4 points. They start with literal trauma rehearsal. And so when somebody's experienced a traumatic event, they will often report that they rehearse those events inside of their dreams. They're very literal. It's almost like identical to the experience that they had. But as they progress through their recovery journey, the mind, the subconscious, starts to abstract those ideas. And so you start to see these nightmares that are much more abstract. They're fighting a dragon. They're running from the boogeyman. They're trying to run away, but their feet are moving through quicksand, or like their feet feel like they're made of lead. But then we cross over, right? So it goes metaphorical nightmares over to symbolic growth, like metaphorical growth. And you start to see the dream patterns change to where they're actually able to get out of the quicksand, or they're actually able to find a place to hide from this monster that they're running from. And as they continue through that process, through mental health counseling and hypnotherapy, they finally come out to the other side where they get back to growth rehearsal, which is a literal dream about the outcomes that they're looking for in their life. So starting with literal negative, metaphorical positive, literal positive. And so you watch them follow this journey. And if you can tell where they're at in the journey and intervene effectively, you can help them bridge that gap just so much more effectively, because you don't want to miss certain things that the brain needs to recover from, and so much more rapidly, because you can tell exactly what their brain is doing without any of the barriers in the way. And I think that's the power of dreams, is you get the raw emotional data without that subconscious or social or shame pressure that keeps people from telling the full truth of their story.
Have you noticed like any outliers, like dreams that skip stages or cycle back, or do you feel like in your experience with your clients, it's usually pretty linear?
That's a wonderful question. Yeah, the way that I'm presenting it is very linear. But as many of us know, the recovery journey is often not very linear. And so I think where I see the most sort of back and forth is the brain will process through that trauma in layers. And so as it uncovers a new layer and solves it, it goes from metaphorical negative to metaphorical positive, but then it hits a roadblock. It's like, oh, okay, well, I've identified something about myself that is true, and I've recovered from that layer. But now I'm at a deeper place where I'm really questioning my identity. So now I go back to the metaphorical negative in order to try and solve that problem, and then move through again to metaphorical positive. So they often bounce back and forth between those, and especially an individual who may be triggered, right? Like maybe they had a car accident and they get back into a car and there was a situation where they had to swerve. I might expect that night that they go back to like a literal nightmare dream. So you do see them bounce around. But even that bouncing around, like when you identify which of the 4 stages they're in, shows, okay, today in our counseling session, in our mental health therapy, we need to revisit this because there's a missing step in the foundation of your mental health that we need to go fill in, so that way you've got a platform upon which to continue to live your life in an effective and healthy way that's going to last for you.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I know you have 10 years worth of clients and anecdotes, but what does this look like on like a larger scale study or a longitudinal study? Do you have any ideas of like how one could go about researching this?
Yeah, I think the more that I learn about research, as somebody in the field, a practitioner, the idea of research can feel a little bit scary to me because um, it's just outside of my day to day life. I don't work in a university. I find myself being very independent and a very divergent thinker. And so the idea of university and academia can feel a little bit intimidating to me just because I don't feel like I fit in. And maybe that's some of my own trauma sort of showing through. And so I think I'd be very open to feedback. Like I try and be a very humble guy. I'm open to suggestions and ideas because there are certainly things that I do not know. I know the things that I know, but I don't know the things that I don't know. I think very simply, it could be taking a cohort of individuals who are diagnosed with PTSD and tracking their dreams through their recovery journey in counseling and starting to note some significant markers, and then comparing those dream pieces and those recorded dreams with some validated studies like the PHQ-9 and GAD-7, well, validated sort of mental health markers like assessment tests. I think starting to connect those, because there's so much research behind the validity of those assessments, I think would be a great place to start and then launch into future research as well.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I mean, you are totally fit for academia. I know it's daunting. I relate to that as well. So I see that in the future in terms of research study. And then I also see the future of how can other clinicians like incorporate this model into their own work with their clients, or patients, whatever you call them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like, how could they do it? I think it definitely should be. And it's been so just wonderfully effective for me that I hope that many other people do use it. I think it's very simple. I think most of the presentation that I'm going to give is very much data. I don't think it's a very advanced technique. I don't think it's a complicated technique. I think when you know what markers to look for, it can help inform your mental health treatment that you're probably already doing, but just make it that much more specific and effective at the situation they're in. And that's one of the things that I'm so excited about this presentation. And I hope that it generates collaboration with others. Because when I look at the dream space, having been on social media and in this field for so long, one of the things that I see is people often dismiss dreams because there's such a spiritual and metaphysical bend to that topic. And so a lot of the academic community will dismiss dreams because it's like, that's spirituality, right? That's for the gurus and the shamans and all of this stuff. So I think by putting effort and energy into this topic, into this idea, and connecting it with an already established medical model, it'll lend credibility to dream research and the dream space that I think it's currently struggling with, because I see such a huge difficulty with finding funding, with finding investment, with finding just even time for people to listen to this topic about dreams and the way that it affects people's life. But if you can start to show that dreams can be a diagnostic tool in a medical model, I think you're going to have a lot of people jump on board, and people open up their wallets and people invest in research, because we're finally showing this isn't just spiritual and metaphysical. There are some hard facts behind this dream stuff. I mean, that's how the field of psychology started, was with dream research. And so it's just crazy to me that we're not continuing that legacy that's been inside the mental health and psychology community, because there's so much funding and so much money in this new emerging field of psychology. But we're just not continuing to integrate the subconscious like it really should be.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order for dreams to be taken seriously. I mean, luckily, at IASD, we value dreams and we see the research potential and the clinical potential, but it's still so niche outside of our little bubble of dream lovers and researchers. So, yeah, I do think the future is heading in that way, though. I think that this is still very early stages of society adopting, dreams as something, as a marker for mental health and all sorts of things. So that's awesome.
Absolutely. And I think you see that through the test of time. Like, spirituality is always giving answers to things that science hasn't yet understood. And so, like, I'm so proud of the spiritual community. I don't necessarily proclaim to be a pastor or a shaman or a guru myself. Like, I'm very much a clinician and a scientist. But I have to give credit, like, at least they're attempting to answer these questions. Where's the scientific community answering these questions? And you see that through history. It's like always been religion and spirituality that has shot for the stars, trying to answer these questions, waiting for science to catch up with the actual hard data behind, okay, this is actually how it works. And so I think we see this same golden opportunity of like religion and spirituality answering these questions. It's time for science to do its work and catch up.
Period. I agree. I think it's happening. Very well said. And yeah, I that's part of what I do on my podcast is like bridge that gap between science and spirituality. And spirituality to me is a very personal journey. Studying consciousness in general is a very subjective experience, which can be difficult in a research setting, valuing the subjective experience. So let's go back to the model really quick because I want to talk about the markers that you were mentioning. So you have these four stages, right? The story, acknowledging the trauma, replaying it, the emotions, experiencing the emotions in different types of scenarios, and then you have uncovering the lie and recovering the lies we tell ourselves, the beliefs about the experience start to come up, and then we have the replacement belief part where we establish new narratives and integrate those lessons. So what are significant markers like that you see maybe in a dream, or like what are certain symbols or themes to look out for each stage?
A big part of trauma is this feeling of victimhood. And there's a lot of emotions behind that word of being a victim. And so I want to treat it carefully and with respect. Um, but the biggest marker that I notice when I'm working with my clients is when they move from literal rehearsal of the traumatic experience and their brain starts to take some assertiveness, some initiative, some license, some space to start to change those things, to start to tweak things. That's when I see just this glimmer of hope start to return to my clients' eyes and inside of their hearts, because they move from this is a thing that happened to me to this is a thing that I am changing. And so it's like, well, I was assaulted by this person, but my brain starts to change it to, well, now in the dream, I'm assaulted by a snake, or I'm assaulted by a spider or a wolf, right? Those are very common, like traumatic symbols when somebody has been victimized by another person. And so when the brain starts to get up that courage and starts to feel some assertiveness and initiative to change the story, it shows me a sign that this person is ready to change the story for their life as well. And so that's a big one for me. I mean, there's other ones that we could probably go into, but I think if someone's going to listen to this like 30-minute piece, like watch out for that in your clients, because that's a huge thing and you want to foster and cultivate that, because that's the recovery journey.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I know this kind of might be a tricky question because everybody's different, but is there like a time frame that you've noticed?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if I have a great answer yet. I think it's been too scattered in my personal experience. Some people take years. Some people progress very rapidly. Their brain is just very, very primed and ready to start to make these changes. Um, and so, I couldn't really put a number on it. Some it's fast, some it's slow. But I'd be very interested to see if we could come up with like an average, right? To see that. I mean, I do see my clients typically weekly, which is pretty common for counseling. You see your therapist once a week. And that's really, really kind of where we start. Unless somebody has some like harm or danger indicators, like they're harm to themselves or others, then I'll see them a couple times a week. Um, but that's kind of what I've observed so far. But I'd be curious to see if we could find an average and then start to see, comparing regular counseling to dream influenced counseling, to see if it does shrink the amount of time it takes for the brain to recover from those processes.
So I have one more question. I don't want to give away too much of the sauce because people will have to come to your presentation. So in this work that you do with counseling, have you noticed a lot of symbolic motifs, particularly in this like growth phase, the growth step, or is it more like deeply personal symbols for each person?
What I notice is it usually starts with metaphorical symbols of hiding, right? I'm hiding from the trauma. And then it transitions into I'm confronting the trauma. And so that to me, when they cross over that bridge, the first one is I'm taking license to reinterpret this experience by making it metaphorical. And then they cross over that barrier to now I'm hiding from it. I'm exercising some agency, right? I can try and get away from the monster, or I can try and set a trap for him, or I can hide under the blankets. And then even better, like we even start to grow a little bit more when now I feel strong enough to fight back. I set a booby trap for it, right? Or I ask a friend for help, or I find a giant sword to try and defend myself. Like those are some really great markers symbolically and archetypally for returning to the dragon fight, right? I'm fighting this dragon in my life.
Yeah, cool. And so, from my experience, of course, I have to plug lucid dreaming in here. That's where the lucid dreaming would come in, because lucid
Yes,
dreaming is all about confront the nightmares, change the scene, control the dream. Like, if it's scary, turn around and ask the monster why he's chasing you or whatever it is. So, it's really about taking back control. So, that's cool. I'll be in there giving some lucid dreaming tips too.
I love it. I love it. And it's so funny the way that everyone finds their own metaphor. I was working with this little kid, and it works for both adults and children. Like I've used this model with children as well. This child was being chased by a monster, and I just introduced kind of we call it depotentiation, right? So a therapist will introduce an idea that's so outside of the box that it forces the client to stop because it disrupts the normal pattern of communication, and then turn their attention inward, right? If I say something so out of the blue, so off the wall that you don't know how to respond to it, it makes you pause for a second and look inside for an answer. It's a very big hypnotherapy tool. And so I did that with this child. I was like, well, what does the monster want to do? And they're like, well, the monster wants to eat me. And I was like, oh. I was like, well, that might be interesting, being eaten by a monster. The child didn't expect that response. I was like, how would it feel? I was like, it might feel like a big warm hug. I'm sure it's pretty warm in the monster's belly. And he smiled a little bit and was like, yeah, I guess it would be. And I was like, and then what would happen after you got eaten? And the kid looked at me and he giggled. And I was like, what? He's like, well, then he'd poop me out.
Oh,
And I was like, yeah. I was like, how funny would that be to be pooped out of a monster? And he giggled and laughed. And it just took this whole symbol and dissolved it. Because now the thing that I was fighting from, I introduced a new frame of reference to say, wouldn't it be silly to get pooped out by a monster? And maybe introduce to him this subconscious idea of, yes, you may be attacked by situations in your life, but what if you're strong enough to just pass through and get pooped out? Because oftentimes that what happens in our life, and sometimes you get a little dirty, a little roughed up from life, but you'll persist. You're strong enough. And that helped him a lot.
oh, that's deep. I like that.
Yeah, it was a good one. It was a good one.
Well, this is awesome stuff. I'm really excited for your presentation. I'll definitely be there. Hopefully, people come check it out, sign up for the conference. And, if they want to follow up with you after, plug your website, pages, all that stuff.
Yeah, honestly, if you're a researcher and you want to collaborate on this, please just text me. Like I'm so eager to connect with others. It's 321-430-5966 is my number. But I'm on all social medias. You can probably see it here at Lyon Mental Health, spelled like my last name, Lyon Mental Health. I've got a counseling practice. It's called Lyon Counseling, Lyon counseling.care online. But yeah, I try and be very accessible. Send me a DM, send me a text message, send me an email. I really believe strongly in this, and I think it has the potential to change what we're doing in the mental health community from a scientific and psychological perspective, and finally bridge that gap between dreams and science.
Awesome. I love it. I agree. It has so much potential. Thanks for dropping your information. He leaked his own phone number, guys. You heard it here first.
It is the business number. It is the office number. So I'll still take a break on the weekend.
Okay, good. All right.
Yeah.
Awesome. I love it. Well, thank you so much.